I never thought I would be the kind of person who could be shoved down the stairs by someone I trusted, someone who was supposed to be part of my family. But here I am, sitting in my bedroom, wrapped in a blanket, my back throbbing, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. And the worst part, she did it with a smile, a laugh that cut through me like a knife, thinking everyone would believe it was an accident. My own daughter-in-law, my son's wife, had just tried to hurt me, and I couldn't understand why. Was I wrong for wanting to protect my family? Tell me, would you have seen it coming if you had known her the way I did? It all started a few years ago, when my son, David, announced that he was engaged to a woman named Emily. At first, I was happy. I wanted my son to be happy, and Emily seemed polite, cheerful, and ambitious. She was younger than him by nearly a decade, and I'll admit, there was a part of me that was cautious. I had raised David to be kind, compassionate, and to value family above all else. Emily, from what I could see, was all charm and smiles, but there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite read. Call it a mother's intuition. At family gatherings, she would laugh a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, compliment me in ways that felt more like flattery than sincerity, and subtly plant seeds of doubt about my influence on David. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking I was overreacting. I told myself I was just being protective. After all, I wanted my son to have a happy marriage, and Emily seemed fine. The first year of their marriage was surprisingly smooth. Emily would visit my house occasionally, often bringing little gifts or insisting on cooking dinner for us. She seemed genuinely eager to be part of the family, but there were moments when her actions made me uneasy. I noticed small things, the way she would watch David during arguments with me, almost as if waiting for him to take her side, or the way she subtly undermined my authority when guests were around. Nothing overt, nothing I could really point to as malicious, but the feeling lingered. I tried to chalk it up to me being sensitive, but I couldn't shake it. My gut told me she was not the woman she pretended to be. The trouble started when David and Emily decided to move into their own house. At first, I was thrilled. They were finally starting their life together, and I wanted to give them space to grow as a couple. But soon after they moved, Emily's true nature began to show. She would call me almost every day, asking for favors that seemed innocent at first. Could I pick up groceries? Could I watch their dog for an afternoon? But these requests slowly escalated into something more controlling. She would make excuses to come over unannounced, often bringing David with her. And during these visits, she would constantly criticize my home, my cooking, my way of doing things. It was subtle at first, little comments about how the house looked messy, or how I didn't know how to make modern recipes. I brushed it off, trying to keep the peace, but inside, a storm was brewing. Then came the first incident that truly made me worry. David was at work, and Emily came over to drop off a casserole for dinner. I welcomed her in, trying to be polite, but she immediately started criticizing how I had folded the laundry and the way the curtains were hung. I remember looking at her and thinking, "This is ridiculous. Who does this?" She smiled sweetly, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I told her calmly that the house was fine the way it was, and that I appreciated her concern, but she laughed, a cold, empty laugh, and said, "Oh, Mom, I just want the best for David. You know, he deserves perfection." That was when the first seed of fear planted itself in my mind. Emily was competitive, and it was me she was competing with. Over the next few months, Emily's behavior escalated. She would manipulate situations to make me look bad in front of David, often twisting words or exaggerating small disagreements. I tried talking to David, but every time I did, he would dismiss my concerns, insisting that I was imagining things, that Emily was just sensitive or a perfectionist. It was heartbreaking. I had raised my son to be loving and thoughtful, and now I felt helpless watching him be slowly pulled into her orbit. The tension reached a breaking point one evening during a family dinner at their house. I had brought my famous apple pie, something I had been known for in the family for years. Emily had invited her parents over, and I could feel the eyes on me the moment I walked in. The comments started almost immediately. How my dress was too old-fashioned. How my pie looked good, but was probably too sweet for David's taste. I tried to laugh it off, but Emily kept at it, subtly mocking my accent, the way I carried myself, everything. I could see her parents smiling awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene. David didn't say a word, sitting there frozen, caught between me and his wife. By the end of the night, I felt humiliated, like an intruder in my own family. That night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made mistakes in my life, in my parenting, in trusting Emily. But I also knew one thing. I had to protect myself, and I had to be careful. Emily was smart, manipulative, and she knew how to make people doubt themselves. I had to find a way to show David the truth without losing him. The next morning, I decided to keep my distance, hoping the situation would calm down, but Emily had other plans. She started visiting more frequently, always bringing David along, always creating small, tense moments between us. She would spill drinks on my furniture, accidentally drop dishes, and make comments that made me look clumsy or forgetful. I began documenting everything, taking pictures, writing down incidents, trying to build a case in my mind, not for the sake of revenge, but for my own sanity. I knew that if something serious happened, I needed proof. Little did I know, what I feared most was about to happen, and it would leave me questioning everything I had ever believed about family and trust. The first time I felt physically threatened was subtle, almost laughable, but it scared me. Emily tripped near the staircase, pretending to stumble, but there was a glint in her eye that I couldn't ignore. I remember thinking, was that really an accident? But I told myself I was overreacting. That was my first mistake, underestimating the lengths she would go to manipulate and control. Then came the day of the incident. I had gone over to their house to drop off some paperwork for David. Just a simple task, nothing confrontational. Emily answered the door, her usual cheerful mask in place, but I could sense a tension in the air. As I walked in, she blocked my path to the stairs with an exaggerated smile. She began chatting casually, but her eyes were calculating. Suddenly, without warning, she shoved me. I felt my body hurtling backward, and the world spun around me as I tumbled down the stairs. I screamed not just from the pain, but from the betrayal, from the realization that someone I trusted could want to harm me. The sound of her laughter echoed in my ears, cold and victorious, as if she had won some cruel game. I hit the bottom with a thud, my back screaming in pain, my mind racing in disbelief. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I couldn't believe it was Emily. When I finally managed to get up, tears streaming down my face, she was standing at the top of the stairs, pretending to be shocked. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I didn't see you there. I must have tripped. Are you hurt?" Her act was perfect, rehearsed, manipulative. I looked at her, anger and fear mixing in a whirlwind of emotions. How could she think that laughing while shoving me down the stairs would convince anyone? But deep down, I knew exactly why she did it. She wanted control, she wanted power, and she wanted me out of the picture. At that moment, lying on the cold floor, trying to catch my breath, I realized this wasn't just about a shove. This was about everything that had been building over the years. The subtle manipulation, the constant undermining, the relentless need to dominate my son's life. Emily thought she could get away with it because she had charm, because she knew how to play people, but I wasn't going to be her victim. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but one thing was certain. She had crossed a line, and the storm I had been holding back for years was about to break. And that's where my story begins, the moment I realized my daughter-in-law was dangerous, the moment I understood that the people who claim to love your family can sometimes be the ones who wish to destroy it. From that day on, nothing was the same. The house felt colder, the smiles felt forced, and I knew I had to be vigilant because Emily was planning her next move. So tell me, if you had been in my shoes, shoving laughter echoing in your ears, pretending it was an accident, what would you have done? Would you have confronted her? Would you have tried to reason with David? Or would you have stayed silent, pretending it never happened? I promise you, the choices I made next would change everything. I spent that night barely sleeping, every muscle in my body aching, my back burning every time I shifted in bed. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what was going on inside my head. I kept seeing Emily's face, the way her lips curled upward just for a second before she masked it with fake concern. That laugh haunted me. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was cruel, confident, and certain. Certain that she would get away with it. I lay there staring at the ceiling, asking myself over and over how my life had reached a point where my own daughter-in-law could push me down the stairs and then stand there pretending to be my savior. I felt stupid for ignoring the signs, angry at myself for staying quiet for so long, and terrified because I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up stiff and sore, barely able to sit up without wincing. I checked my phone and saw several missed calls from David. My heart tightened. Part of me wanted to answer and scream, to tell him everything, to beg him to believe me. Another part of me was afraid. Emily had had years to prepare for this. She knew how to play the victim, how to twist stories, how to cry on cue. I knew if I rushed into this emotionally, I might lose my son forever. So I did something that felt unnatural to me. I stayed calm. I texted David back and told him I was sore from the fall but resting, that I'd talk to him later. Even as I typed those words, my hands were shaking. A few hours later, David came over alone. The moment I saw him standing in my doorway, his face full of worry, I almost broke down. He hugged me carefully, apologizing over and over for not being there, for not checking in sooner. He said Emily told him I had slipped, that I had lost my balance near the stairs and fallen before she could catch me. I watched his face closely as he spoke, looking for doubt, for suspicion, but all I saw was confusion and concern. That hurt more than anything. Emily's version had already taken root. I sat him down and told him I needed to be honest with him. I described everything slowly, carefully, from the tension that had been building for years to the exact moment her hands pushed into my back. I told him about the laugh. I told him how it wasn't an accident. As I spoke, I could see his posture change. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched, but instead of anger, I saw uncertainty. He rubbed his temples and said, "Mom, I don't know what to think. Emily swears she would never hurt you. She was crying when she told me. She feels awful." That was when I realized just how deep Emily's manipulation went. She had already cried her tears, already painted herself as the traumatized one. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse him of choosing her over me. I just looked at him and said something that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside my bones. I told him that I loved him more than anything in this world, that I would never lie about something this serious, and that all I asked was for him to keep his eyes open. I told him to watch her closely, to notice the little things, the way she spoke to me when no one else was around, the way she smiled at my discomfort. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. When he left, I felt more alone than I ever had before. Over the next few weeks, Emily completely changed her approach. She stopped visiting me directly and instead sent gifts. Flowers, baked goods, handwritten notes apologizing for the accident. To anyone looking from the outside, she looked like the perfect daughter-in-law, bending over backward to make things right. But I knew better. This was damage control. She was building her image, reinforcing the idea that she was kind and caring while quietly isolating me. Friends started calling, asking if I was okay, telling me how worried Emily was about me. Every call felt like another reminder that I was losing control of the narrative. Physically, I was healing slowly, but emotionally, I was unraveling. I became hyper, aware of everything. Every conversation, every glance, every smile felt loaded with hidden meaning. I started replaying past interactions in my mind, moments I had dismissed before but now saw clearly. The back-handed compliments, the way she would position herself between David and me during arguments, the way she would talk about starting fresh without old influences. It all clicked into place, and the picture it formed terrified me. One afternoon, I received a message from Emily asking if we could talk privately. My first instinct was to refuse, but something told me I needed to face her, to hear her without David present. Maybe I wanted confirmation. Maybe I wanted closure. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe. When she arrived, she looked fragile, almost delicate, her eyes red as if she had been crying. Anyone else would have felt sympathy. I felt nothing but cold resolve. She started by apologizing again, her voice trembling, telling me how guilty she felt, how she hadn't slept since the incident. I listened without interrupting. Then, slowly, her tone shifted. She began talking about stress, about how hard marriage was, about how David was caught between us. She said she felt like I didn't trust her, that I was always judging her. Finally, she looked me straight in the eye and said something that made my blood run cold. She told me that accidents happen, that people fall all the time, and that pushing this issue would only hurt David. It was a warning, carefully wrapped in concern. I leaned forward and told her quietly that I knew exactly what she had done. I told her that I wasn't afraid of her, that I wouldn't let her rewrite reality. For just a second, her mask slipped. Her eyes hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line, and I saw the real Emily. She smiled, not warmly, but smugly, and said, "Be careful, or people might think you're confused. Falls can do that to someone your age." That was the moment I understood the full extent of her cruelty. She wasn't just trying to hurt me physically. She was trying to destroy my credibility. I left the cafe shaking, my heart pounding in my ears. That conversation confirmed what I already knew. Emily was dangerous, and she was willing to take this as far as she needed to. I realized then that staying silent wasn't an option anymore, but neither was rushing into confrontation without proof. I needed to be smarter. I needed to protect myself. From that day on, I started documenting everything more carefully. I saved messages, recorded dates and times, wrote down exact words used in conversations. I installed cameras in my home under the excuse of security, making sure they covered entrances and common areas. I began setting boundaries, limiting my interactions with Emily, always making sure someone else was present when we were together. It was exhausting, living like this, constantly on guard, but it also gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. David, meanwhile, was struggling. I could see the strain in his face whenever we spoke. Emily was constantly in his ear, feeding him her version of events, painting me as overbearing, unstable, unwilling to let go. I tried not to badmouth her to him, knowing it would only push him further away. Instead, I focused on being consistent, calm, and honest. I wanted my actions to speak louder than her lies. As weeks turned into months, the tension escalated. Emily began provoking me in subtle ways, making comments designed to get a reaction, pushing boundaries just enough to test how far she could go. She wanted me to snap. She wanted proof that I was the unreasonable one. but I refused to give her that satisfaction. Every time I felt anger rising, I reminded myself of the stares, of the laughter, of the way she had underestimated me. What she didn't realize was that by trying so hard to control everything, she was making mistakes, small ones at first. Contradictions in her stories, moments where her mask slipped in front of the wrong people, and I noticed everything. I began to see that this wasn't just a conflict between two women. This was a power struggle, and Emily believed she had already won. She believed I was weak, isolated, easy to discredit. She thought she could push me out of my son's life completely. But she was wrong, because as broken and hurt as I felt, something inside me had hardened. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman who had survived betrayal, who had been physically attacked and emotionally manipulated, and who refused to be erased. I didn't know exactly how this would end yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Emily had started a game she didn't fully understand, and sooner or later, the truth would come out. And when it did, everything would change. By the time I reached that point, my life felt like it was split into two versions of reality. In one version, the one everyone else saw, I was the older mother who had taken a bad fall, who was being lovingly cared for by a concerned daughter-in-law. In the other version, the one I lived in every single day, I was constantly watching my back, measuring every word I spoke, and bracing myself for the next quiet attack. I learned very quickly that emotional warfare doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's silent, slow, and calculated, and that made it even more terrifying. Emily started increasing her presence again, but now she did it cleverly. She never came alone anymore. There was always someone with her, a neighbor, a friend, sometimes even one of her cousins. She would insist on helping me around the house, loudly offering to clean or cook while making sure everyone heard how worried she was about my health. She'd touch my arm gently, smile sweetly, and ask if I was feeling dizzy again. Every word was designed to plant a seed. I could almost see her strategy unfolding in real time. If I reacted negatively, I would look ungrateful or unstable. If I stayed quiet, she would control the narrative. So I smiled back, thanked her, and played my role, even though it felt like swallowing broken glass. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit alone and rewatch the security footage from my cameras. Not because I expected to see something dramatic, but because it grounded me. It reminded me that I wasn't imagining things, that I was still capable of seeing clearly. I began noticing patterns in Emily's behavior. The way she positioned herself near doorways. The way her tone shifted when David wasn't in the room. The way she'd lower her voice just enough, so only I could hear certain comments. Once, as she handed me a cup of tea, she leaned in and whispered, "You're looking weaker these days. People are starting to notice." She smiled as if she'd paid me a compliment. My hands trembled, but I said nothing. David, on the other hand, was unraveling. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, constantly trying to keep the peace between his wife and his mother. I could see the conflict tearing him apart. He started visiting me less, not because he didn't care, but because every visit ended in tension. Emily would call him repeatedly while he was with me, asking when he was coming home, saying she didn't feel well, reminding him how stressful everything had been for her. And every time he left early, I felt a piece of my heart crack a little more. One evening, David finally snapped. He came over unannounced, his eyes red, his voice shaking. He told me Emily felt like she was being accused of something terrible without proof, that she felt judged and attacked. He asked me outright if I was sure, absolutely sure, that what happened on the stairs wasn't an accident. That question hurt more than the fall ever did. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had trusted, and I realized how close I was to losing him completely. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I told him something I hadn't said out loud before. I told him I was scared. I told him that I didn't feel safe around his wife. I told him that whatever he chose to believe, I needed distance, not to punish him or her, but to protect myself. For the first time, he didn't interrupt me. He just listened. When he left that night, he hugged me longer than usual, and I felt something shift. Not resolution, but doubt. Doubt had finally entered his mind, and that was something Emily hadn't counted on. After that, Emily changed tactics again. She became colder with me, more distant, but also more careless. She assumed she had pushed me far enough into a corner that I wouldn't dare fight back. She started making sharper comments, not as subtle as before. Once, during a family gathering, she joked loudly about how older people can be so dramatic after a little fall. People laughed awkwardly. I didn't. I just looked at her, calmly, steadily, and for the first time, she looked away first. That moment gave me strength. She wasn't untouchable. She was just arrogant. Around this time, something unexpected happened. A neighbor of David and Emily's, a woman I barely knew, reached out to me privately. She said she didn't want to cause trouble, but she had seen something the day I fell. She said she had been outside watering her plants when she heard raised voices near the stairs through the open door. She didn't see the push clearly, but she heard Emily laugh. A short, sharp laugh, followed by my scream. When Emily later told everyone it was an accident, the neighbor felt uneasy. She said she hadn't spoken up earlier because she wasn't sure, and she didn't want to get involved, but the more time passed, the worse she felt. When I hung up the phone, I cried for the first time in weeks, not out of fear, but relief. I wasn't alone. Someone else had seen through her. Someone else knew. I wrote everything down immediately. Every word the neighbor said, every detail. I didn't know yet how or when I would use this information, but I knew it mattered. And this is where I want to pause for a moment and talk directly to you. This was the situation I was in. I had been hurt, manipulated, slowly isolated, and now I finally had a small piece of validation, a hint that the truth might come out. But I also knew that if I moved too fast, if I confronted Emily or exposed her without thinking it through, I could lose my son forever. So before I tell you what I decided to do next, I want you to stop for a second and ask yourself this. If you were in my place, if your own daughter-in-law had pushed you down the stairs and then spent months making you look unstable, what would you do? Would you confront her openly? Would you go straight to your son with everything? Or would you stay quiet and gather proof, even if it meant enduring more pain? Tell me honestly, because this choice would define everything that came after. After a lot of sleepless nights, I chose patience, not because I was weak, but because I understood something Emily didn't. The louder person isn't always the one who wins. Sometimes the person who waits, watches, and prepares is far more dangerous. I started subtly opening up to a few trusted people, not with accusations, but with facts. I described events calmly, consistently, never exaggerating. I let patterns speak for themselves. I noticed people starting to ask questions, starting to notice Emily's behavior for themselves. Emily sensed the shift, and it made her reckless. She began pushing boundaries again, testing how far she could go. One afternoon, she cornered me in the kitchen, while David was in another room. Her voice dropped, her smile vanished, and she told me I was ruining her life, that if I didn't stop playing the victim, she would make sure I lost everything, including my son. She stepped closer, invading my space, daring me to react. Instead, I calmly stepped back and said something that changed the air between us forever. I told her that I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore, and that secrets have a way of surfacing when people least expect them. The look on her face was pure rage. She walked away without another word, but I knew then that the final confrontation was coming. She wouldn't let this go quietly. She had gone too far. invested too much in her lies, and I was ready. I didn't know exactly when it would happen or how dramatic it would be, but I knew the storm was about to break. The truth was no longer just something I carried alone. It was building, gaining weight, and soon it would come crashing down on all of us. The days after that confrontation felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes your skin crawl. Emily stopped calling. She stopped texting. She even stopped posting her carefully curated messages about family and gratitude online. Anyone else might have felt relieved, but I knew better. Silence in her world wasn't peace. It was preparation. I could feel it in my chest, that heavy sense of waiting for something inevitable, like the air before a storm breaks. David started visiting me more often again, but something was different this time. He watched, he listened. He asked questions he had never asked before. He noticed when Emily's stories didn't line up, when her tone shifted too quickly from tears to anger. One afternoon, while sitting at my kitchen table, he admitted that he felt like he was constantly walking on eggshells at home, that no matter what he did, it was never enough for her. Hearing that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. It meant he was finally seeing what I had been living with for years. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. Emily had insisted on hosting a family lunch, inviting me, David, and a few extended relatives. I hesitated, but David asked me to come, saying he needed me there. I trusted him. When I arrived, the house felt tense, like every wall was listening. Emily greeted me with a tight smile and an overly cheerful voice, playing the perfect hostess. But I could see it in her eyes. She was furious, and she had something planned. As we sat in the living room after lunch, Emily suddenly brought up the fall. Out of nowhere, she said she felt it was time to clear the air, to move on as a family. Then she looked directly at me and said loudly that it hurt her deeply that I had implied. She had pushed me. She said she felt accused of being a monster, and tears welled up in her eyes on command. Everyone looked at me. The room went silent. My heart was pounding, but I stayed calm. I took a deep breath and said I never implied anything. I said clearly, in front of everyone, that she had pushed me. Gasps filled the room. Emily immediately began crying harder, shaking her head, saying I was confused, that I had fallen, that she would never hurt me. She turned to David, clinging to his arm, begging him to tell everyone she wasn't that kind of person. That was when David did something I will never forget. He gently pulled his arm away from her and said, quietly but firmly, that he wanted to hear everything. He asked me to explain exactly what happened, so I did. I described the push, the laugh, the look on her face. I spoke slowly, clearly, not emotionally, just truthfully. Then I said there was someone else who had heard it too. Emily's face drained of color. She tried to interrupt, but David raised his hand and asked her to let me finish. I explained that a neighbor had heard raised voices, had heard Emily laugh, and had heard me scream. The room erupted into murmurs. Emily started shouting then, accusing me of turning people against her, of trying to destroy her marriage. That was the moment her mask shattered completely. The calm, caring act vanished, replaced by raw anger. David looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. He asked her if it was true, if she had laughed. She stammered, tried to change the subject, tried to cry again, but it didn't work. Too many people had seen her slip. Too many pieces finally fit together. One of the relatives spoke up, mentioning past moments where Emily had been cruel or dismissive. Another admitted they had always felt uncomfortable around her. The truth, once released, spread fast. Emily lost control completely. She screamed that none of us appreciated her, that she had sacrificed everything, that I was poisoning everyone against her. And then she said something that sealed everything. She shouted that she had only wanted me out of the way, that David was hers now, that I should have known better than to stand between them. The moment the words left her mouth, she froze. She realized what she had said. So did everyone else. The room went dead silent. David's face crumpled. He looked devastated, betrayed, and furious all at once. He told her to stop talking, to leave the room. She refused, continuing to rant, blaming me for everything. That's when David told her the marriage was over, that he needed space, and that she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Emily laughed then, a hysterical, broken laugh, the same sound I had heard at the top of the stairs. Hearing it again sent a chill through me, but this time I wasn't afraid. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The house felt heavy, like it was finally exhaling after holding its breath for years. I sat there, shaking, as relatives gathered around me, apologizing for not seeing it sooner. David knelt in front of me and cried, apologizing again and again for doubting me, for not protecting me. I held his face in my hands and told him I loved him, that none of this was his fault. In that moment, I felt something mend between us that I had feared was broken forever. The aftermath wasn't easy. Emily didn't disappear quietly. She tried to spin the story online, portraying herself as the victim of a cruel family who turned against her. But it didn't matter anymore. The people who mattered knew the truth. David moved out temporarily, started therapy, and began the painful process of untangling his life from hers. I focused on healing, both physically and emotionally. I learned how strong I really was, how much resilience lived inside me, even when I felt powerless. There were nights when guilt crept in, when I wondered if I could have handled things differently, if I should have spoken up sooner. But then I remembered the stares, the laughter, the calculated cruelty, and I knew I had done the only thing I could to survive. I hadn't destroyed a family. I had exposed the truth. Emily eventually faced legal consequences when the incident was re-examined. It didn't bring me joy, but it brought closure. It was proof that reality, no matter how long it's buried, has a way of surfacing. And as painful as this journey was, it taught me something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Silence protects abusers, not peace. Speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes, is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. After everything finally settled, after the shouting stopped and the door stopped slamming, I found myself sitting alone in my living room one evening, surrounded by a quiet that felt completely different from before. This quiet wasn't heavy or threatening. It was calm. For the first time in a very long while, I could breathe without feeling like I needed to watch my back. My body was still healing, my heart still sore, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I kept thinking about how close I had come to losing everything that mattered to me, simply because I was afraid to speak up sooner. And that realization stayed with me. David and I began rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, like repairing something fragile that had cracked but not completely shattered. We talked more honestly than we ever had before. He told me about the moments he ignored, the red flags he brushed aside because he wanted so badly to believe his marriage was normal, that love alone could fix everything. I told him about the fear, the nights I lay awake questioning my own sanity, wondering if maybe I really was overreacting. Those conversations were painful, but they were also healing. They reminded me that even strong people can be manipulated, and that trust, once broken, takes time and patience to restore. There were days when doubt still crept in, days when I replayed everything in my head and wondered if I could have handled things differently, if staying quiet for so long had somehow enabled her behavior. But then I would remember the look on Emily's face when the truth finally came out, not triumph or confidence, but panic. And I understood something important. People like her rely on silence, on confusion, on fear. The moment light is shined on their actions, they lose their power. Physically, I healed. Emotionally, I grew stronger in ways I never expected. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, for having boundaries, for trusting my instincts. I learned that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and being patient doesn't mean accepting abuse. Most of all, I learned that my voice mattered, even when it shook, even when it was inconvenient for others to hear. Looking back now, I don't see myself as a victim anymore. I see myself as a survivor, a woman who was pushed literally and emotionally to her breaking point and who chose not to stay broken. I protected myself, I protected my truth, and in doing so, I saved my relationship with my son. That alone makes every painful step worth it. So here's what I want to leave you with. If something feels wrong in your gut, listen to it. If someone is making you feel small, scared, or crazy for questioning their behavior, pay attention. And if you ever find yourself silenced by fear of losing someone you love, remember this. The people who truly love you will want the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. If you were on my side through this story, please like this video. If you want to hear more real, emotional stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I really want to know your thoughts. Was I wrong for waiting as long as I did? Or would you have handled it the same way? Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.